Well, hello and welcome to the Figge Art Museum's virtual Thursdays at the Figge program series. My name is Melissa Moore and I'm Director of Education here at the Figge, actually here from my basement, but typically at the Figge, and we are very happy you could join us tonight for this exciting program. For the immediate future, we're going to be hosting these virtual Thursday programs most weeks, so please check out the Figge's website for up-to-date information on those programs and also for registration information. So, next week's program will feature the artist Rob Lipnick, who will speak about his upcoming exhibition, Mountain Spaces, Stories, and Stacks, on view at the Figge beginning August 15th. Please note that this program has changed dates. It was scheduled to be on August 13th, but is now going to be next week on August 6th, and we hope you're able to make it. The program, just like tonight, will start at 6:30 p.m., and after you register online, you'll receive a link to join the program on the day that the program is scheduled. I want to say a big thanks to Chris and Mary Rayburn because we're able to offer these programs at no cost to you because of their generous support. So thank you so much, Chris and Mary. Two quick notes about the program tonight. Since this program is hosted in a webinar format, you can type your questions that you might have either anonymously or from you into the Q&A box or into the chat. I'll keep an eye on those, and then when we get to that point in the program where we can address them, we'll make sure to bring those up. Also, I did want to mention that we are recording the session for archival purposes. So at this time, it is my great pleasure to turn things over to Vanessa Stage, the Figge's assistant curator and the curator of the exhibition, Seen and Heard, The Art of Empowerment. Vanessa will be conducting the program this evening. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and get the presentation pulled up, and then we'll get started. Good evening. Thank you for attending tonight's program. I will be discussing the curatorial process for the exhibition Seen and Heard, The Art of Empowerment, currently on exhibition in the second floor orientation space at the Figge Art Museum through May 2021. Within the program, I'll speak to the work that went into the exhibition, as well as to highlight several of the included artists and groupings within the exhibition. I'd like to give you a little bit of background on myself. I grew up in the west end of Davenport, near the old Davenport Museum of Art, which is the predecessor to the Figge Art Museum. I attended the University of Iowa, where I earned a bachelor's degree in art history and Italian. Following the University of Iowa, I interned at several museums and later earned my master's degree from Western Illinois University in museum studies. In my role as assistant curator, I develop and plan exhibitions, handle and install artwork, research the collection, and also serve as an advisor to the Acquisitions and Loans Committee. I have been working at the Figge for about 4.5 years, and I recently curated Didier William Lacou QC Pride photographs by Andy Abeda, and was co-curator for Magnetic West, as well as the Seen and Heard exhibition, which we'll be discussing tonight. I'll mention that if you'd like to view a virtual version of the exhibition, you can visit figgeartmuseum.org. There are additional images of the space and the works there. Seen and Heard, The Art of Empowerment is drawn from the museum collection and features 14 dynamic artworks by 13 different artists. And it also includes several recent acquisitions. The exhibition was motivated by a couple different things. As an institution, whether that is through exhibitions, programming, or additions to the permanent collection, we want to create the opportunity for meaningful interactions with art. While issues of inequality remain prevalent in the art world, we are also dedicated to better representing the world in which we live and the artists who are an essential part of it. 2020 is also the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, a time that I think is very appropriate for us to reflect on what it means to have equal rights across different facets of society, including in art making and within the structure of the art world, and how the struggle for equality continues today in many different forms. I established an overall theme featuring artwork by women who asserted their artistic empowerment in spite of social and cultural barriers, as well as those who bring attention to the marginalization of others through their work. During the mid-20th century, many women artists reported that they were not taken as seriously nor considered as talented as their male counterparts. As sculptor Beverly Pepper stated, the female artist inevitably finds that she must fight harder than most males to gain an equivalent position. Regardless of obstacles during their careers, numerous women artists made innovative and significant bodies of work. They tenaciously pursued art making for decades, determinedly brought their creative visions to life, and forged innovative methods and techniques. A number of them also created work concerning women's experiences, establishing that it was a subject deserving of visibility and recognition. While opportunities and representation for women have since improved, there is still gender disparity. Roughly half of practicing artists are female, but they represent less than a third of solo exhibitions in museums and in galleries. And some major museums demonstrate even lower figures. Beyond gender, due to race, disparities due to race, class, ethnicity, education, and sexuality are also part of continuing inequality. In addition to individual empowerment, social activism is integral to the practice of many of the artists included in Seen and Heard. They may recontextualize art history, challenge established narratives, or make visible marginalized communities. Whether pursuing individual or communal agency, the artists in Seen and Heard have contributed to a more inclusive and environment in the art world and beyond. In deciding what to include in the exhibition, there were several key works, including recent acquisitions like Louise Nevelson's Moonzag 3, Grace Hardigan's The Dream, as well as several works that have been in the collection for a while, like Beverly Pepper's Pythias Presence. These are important art historically and strong representations of each artist's work. In starting to research other objects to expand and deepen the theme of the exhibition, I began researching what women artists we had in the collection, what their respective artworks concerned, as well as their biographies, history of their career, and to evaluate the works visually. Within the exhibition, I wanted to create a good aesthetic as well as thematic flow as visitors move through the space. There are a couple ways that we go about researching objects in the collection. We have the object database. If you look at the image on the display, you can see an object record for Grant Wood's self-portrait. The database tracks information about all of the objects in the collection, including title, medium, description, etc. So I looked at what artists we had in the collection by gender. About 10% of the artists represented in the collection are women, while about 8% of the artworks are by women artists. And we have about 4,000 objects in the collection. I created a draft list of works of interest and whittled that down as I researched more about the artists and the work, as well as keeping in mind the interrelationships between the works. We also have paper object files that often have more in-depth information on the objects, sometimes including correspondence, notes, articles. These things can at times be invaluable in terms of interpreting that specific work. And sometimes that information is replicated nowhere else. And for example, if it's a personal correspondence or something like between a former curator and the artist, things like that. Also on the screen, you will see an image of collection storage. Like I said, in addition to considering the content, the themes, and the artists, it is of course integral to go view the artwork in person. I mean, it's a practical consideration. You're looking at condition, what kind of framing would need to occur, things like that, as well as the kind of presence and qualities that that work has in person, as well as how they relate to other works that are planned to be included in the exhibition. And I have to say, it's one of the best part of the job to be able to go back into the collection storage and look at the wonderful works of art that we have in the collection. The paintings are largely kept on screens that are pulled out, and then the works on paper, as you can see in that image below, that's a flat file storage, so that is where the works on paper are usually stored. As I was building the checklist, I kept in mind possible layouts of the exhibition, again, considering the aesthetic as well as the thematic content of the work. The pairing above, or the pairing on the display, is an example of a layout decision based on aesthetics as well as the content. On the left, we have an inauspicious union by artist Jamie Brunson. And on the right, we have Cotton Eater 2 by Alison Saar. The color palette with the dominant blue tones, as well as the scale of the works, they work well across from one another. They balance one another within the space. Also, we have the silhouetted forms in Brunson's work, which relate to the graphic manner in which Saar has rendered the figure as well as the plants. And in terms of content, both works use symbols in a central role within the art, and also relate to themes of power and agency. So in Brunson's work, a branch, a heart, and a picture are all paired across from objects capable of destroying them. So a hatchet, a knife, and a hammer. The symbols sit within house-shaped cells, while the title references unbalanced power relationships. So it seems to reference these imbalances within a domestic setting. Brunson is interested in symbols and their ability to communicate meaning to viewers, but really the meaning is left up to the viewer as they try to decipher what the symbols mean to them. That interaction becomes an essential part of the work, that navigation between the viewer and the work, and the viewer trying to figure out what's being said with this painting, or really how it speaks to them. In Cotton Eater 2, Alison Saar depicts a woman eating cotton, material that has no nutritional value, as well as a symbol referencing the legacy of slavery in the United States. Saar has stated that she views her work as a way to bring inequities and injustices to the forefront. Through her sculptures, installations, and prints, she explores issues of race, gender, history, and identity. So it is an essential part of developing any exhibition to figure out how the objects will work and relate to one another in the space. As you saw in the previous slide, for Seen and Heard, I completed an elevation. You can see that in the center. So it's a simple way to take into account doorways, how big the walls are in relation to how big the works are, and how they relate to one another in terms of, scale and color. Now here I have represented a little bit more complex preparatory model for an exhibition. On the bottom is an image of one of the scale models that we completed for French moderns. So as things get a little bit more complex, there's the utilization of these physical models, as well as three-dimensional modeling computer software. And this really helps in terms of how to visualize everything within the space, as well as how these objects will live together within that space in terms of scale, form, and other qualities. It also allows us to take into consideration practical things, like where the doorways are, if there's enough room for people to easily walk through the space. For Seen and Heard, everything stayed roughly in the same place from the initial plans for the Orientation 2 space, although we did decide later to move Pythias Present out to a more central position. It gave it more room around the sculpture, and it allowed it to really have that monumental impact as you're entering either through the elevator or at the top of the stairway. It also balances Butterfield's Half Moon, which is another large sculpture that you can see on the other side of the gallery space. Now I'm going to walk through some of the specific artists included in the exhibition to give a bit more insight into why they were included, as well as some of the groupings. Some of these will be brief, but please visit the virtual exhibition or come to the museum to learn more and to also see these works. I'll begin with this image by Marisol called Women's Equality. It portrays early leaders of the women's equality movement, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. They embrace one another while a hand gestures to them from below. Marisol often included herself in her work. She would make plaster casts of her hands, of her face. She would put images of herself onto the face of her assemblages and her sculptures, and through other representations. And her work often addressed women's societal roles. In Women's Equality, she has included that hand, and in that way she connects herself to the two women, to the lineage of women's rights, but also through that hand we as a viewer can connect ourselves to those two women. So in addition to being perhaps the artist's hand, when we're looking at that work, that can become our hand and connect us visually to these two women rights activists. I wanted to include this work in Seen and Heard because of the direct connection to the women's rights movement in the imagery, as well as the connection that Marisol created with them through her work. And of course, the fact that Marisol is an extremely important artist of the 20th century who often focused on women's experiences in her work. Born in France, Marisol was a Venezuelan American artist who was active in the New York art scene. Although she's often grouped with pop artists, her work is definitely its own. She pursued her own individual vision, blending elements of pop culture, of Dada, Surrealism, and folk art. Her assemblages are among her best-known works, created from carved wood, plaster, fabric, integrating found objects. They often focused on societal roles using parody as a way to probe issues of sexuality, of gender, and of identity. Of her work and of her life, she stated, "I've always wanted to be free in my life and art. It's as important to me as truth." Within the exhibition space, Marisol's Women's Equality, Hartigan's The Dream, and Lee Krasner's primary series, Pink Stone, are grouped together. Again, this has thematic as well as aesthetic reasons. Visually, the works share bright pops of pink, and they create a balance because of their scale. In terms of flow, the works transition from figurative and more controlled, as seen in the Marisol work, to Hardigan's abstract work that has figurative elements to it. You notice there's things that look like leaves, perhaps some oranges in the top right. And then we get to Krasner's abstraction on the far right. I also felt that the relationship of mark making would be interesting to viewers from, again, the more controlled to the more gestural. All three of these women were active in the New York art scene, and they had different experiences within that setting, which I also think is important to mention, that every every individual has their own experiences, and within that scene, they had different experiences. And it's Grace Hartigan was an abstract expressionist painter. She was known for her combination of gestural painting and recognizable imagery in her Mercier work. She was one of the few female abstract painters to receive widespread recognition during the 50s. The Dream was dedicated to her husband, Dr. Winston Price, whom Hartigan moved to Baltimore with in 1960. Hartigan felt that being an artist was all-consuming and spent years enduring, various hardships and making personal sacrifices to develop her work. She also detested being called a woman artist and also wanted to be referred to as specifically a painter rather than an artist. Lee Krasner was a prominent figure in the New York art world and is best known for her large abstract expressionist work. Krasner considered painting autobiographical and was dedicated to expressing her inner self through her work. She was pretty open about some of the sexism she experienced from her time as a student with Hans Hofmann to the critical treatment of her work in comparison to that of Jackson Pollock. One interesting anecdote that is oft used as an example of the attitude, the dismissive attitude towards women artists at the time, is when Krasner was studying with Hans Hofmann. Apparently, he saw her work and saw that it was so good, and it stated that this is so good you wouldn't know a woman did it. She was a driven and passionate artist who kept creating and evolving in her work throughout her career. Another placement that I wanted to briefly mention is Butterfield's Half Moon and Jane Wilson's High Tide. These are placed so that the Wilson is visible kind of behind the Butterfield horse, and then also as you're rounding around the Butterfield, it's like to the left and a little bit behind. But I wanted them to be visible in relation to one another. And this is because of the driftwood used to create Half Moon and the ocean as represented in the Wilson painting. So they have this relationship in terms of, where their inspiration was sourced from, as well as the organic quality of the final work. Half Moon is a favorite among our visitors. Since the 1970s, Butterfield has worked with found objects and a variety of techniques to create her horse sculptures. Half Moon was originally modeled in driftwood. It was then dismantled, and each piece of wood was individually cast in bronze. The pieces were welded together to form the horse, and then they were painted to replicate the driftwood. Of some of her early horse sculptures, Butterfield stated, "I wanted to do these big, beautiful mares that were as strong and imposing as stallions, but capable of creation and nourishing life." It was a very personal feminist statement. The Jane Wilson painting is a recently donated work that we are very grateful to have in the collection. Wilson was born in Seymour, Iowa, and attended and later taught at the University of Iowa. So there's this wonderful local connection here. But she went on to have a prominent career based on the East Coast. In 1949, she moved to New York City, where she worked in an abstract expressionist mode before shifting to these expressionistic landscapes. This painting of a turbulent sky meeting ocean waves is representative of Wilson's highly individualized body of work. For decades, she pursued her own vision and avoided trends, a quality of which she simply stated, "I was never good at emulating others." Another work, like the Butterfield, that is a longtime visitor favorite and is a very important work for us to have in the collection, is Pythias Presence by Beverly Pepper. Beverly Pepper was one of the first women who worked in large-scale sculpture. She, moved tons of earth, welded with steel. She really pushed the boundaries of, what people thought of as a woman being able to do as an artist. In fact, when she was attending school, she was actually kept away from basically the power tools at an early stage in her career because they didn't want her to hurt herself. As she later started working, she was the first artist to use Core 10 steel. It's a corrosion-resistant material, and it's been used by some of the most recognized artists as well as architects in the world. For example, the Chicago Picasso is made out of Core 10 steel. As I mentioned, she was one of the few women working in sculpture on a large scale at the time, but then you see in the example of her working with Core 10 steel as the first artist to use it in creating her sculpture, how much of a significant role she has within the medium of sculpture. Pythias Presence was from a series of sculptures called the Moline Markers, and that was created in collaboration with John Deere Foundry. Okay. So these are two also recent acquisitions to the museum collection. The Continuity series is by an artist named Joe Sandman. Those are made of radiator hoses filled with plaster, twisted, and carved. Joe Sandman originally trained as a painter, but she produced a greatly varied body of work that is informed by continuous experimentation and innovation. She's worked in photography, painting, sculpture, installation, and assemblage, among other mediums. Louise Nevelson is to the right in Moonzag 3. As I said, another recent acquisition that we are very happy to be able to have in the museum collection and to share with the community. One Louise Nevelson quote that I thought was particularly revealing is that when she was asked about the women's movement, she responded, "I am a woman's liberation." She really was the embodiment of personal freedom in her life, in her art making. She wore what she wanted. She pursued what she wanted in her art making as a mature artist, and she also experienced an atmosphere in which women were not necessarily accorded equal representation or opportunity. Talking about her early life, she stated, "Women at that time were supposed to look pretty and throw little handkerchiefs around. Well, I couldn't play that role." She didn't live or make art according to convention. She is known for these monochromatic assemblages made of found wood. They're painted black, white, or gold. And she struggled for many years before receiving recognition. And she was also pretty outspoken about the problematic power structures in the art world. Lastly, I wanted to discuss this grouping of works that flanks the entrance into the permanent galleries. On the left, we have Carrie Mae Weems' Not Manet's Type, as well as two images by Barbara Morgan. And to the right, we have a digital photo collage by Esther Parada. These were hung together because of the medium of photography, but as well as the themes within the work. They involve questions relating to power, to agency, as well as specifically in the grouping on the left in the art world, in the field of modern dance, as well as in the visual fine arts. This work is Define the Frame by Esther Peralta. She was an artist, a writer, and an educator. She frequently addressed political, historical, and social histories, as well as the relationship specifically between the United States and Latin American countries. She often used historical imagery combined with her own images to probe issues of power between people, between nations, as well as investigating the power that images themselves have. This in particular shows contrasting representations of the US government's military interventions in Nicaragua. Her digital collage includes a 1927 image of US Marines training members of the Nicaraguan National Guard, as well as images of women who personally experienced the Nicaraguan Revolution. So she was interested in how images shape perception, and through this combination of imagery, she questions the dominant narrative, as well as what alternative views exist beyond that. And as the title suggests, define the frame, we should question what structure is supporting the imagery, as well as the narratives that we consume through that imagery. So this is the grouping on the left. We have two images by Barbara Morgan. Morgan made numerous contributions to photography. She co-founded Aperture magazine. She completed many technical experimentations, and she is perhaps very well known for her images of dancers in motion, of which these are two fine examples. Here she captures the choreographer Martha Graham and Pearl Primus. Both women had an immense impact on modern dance. Graham's style remains foundational, while Primus sought to shift perceptions of African dance in order to reflect its importance as a form of cultural expression. Graham created war theme in response to the Spanish Civil War. The pose seen, it's on the top, the pose on the top is meant to reference the form of like a machine gun. And on the bottom, we have Pearl Primus with Speak to Me of Rivers, which was a meditation on the African diaspora. And finally, on to Carrie Mae Weems' Not Mayonnaise Type. I wanted to make sure that this was hung near the entryway into the permanent collection galleries, specifically because I like the way that it called out it calls out the structure of the art world in the past, and I think it's a nice context to go into the permanent collections with, so that you consider those in relation to the statement and that Weems is making with this work. Weems has stated that photography can be used as a powerful weapon toward instituting political and cultural change. Throughout her career, she has worked to create a dialogue exploring gender, race, and society. And Not Mayonnaise Type is one of those works. It's a series re-examining the role of Black women within art historical contexts. And here she gives them a voice in a realm where they have traditionally been silenced, objectified, and largely omitted from the narrative. So to conclude this program, I wanted to share an excerpt of Carrie Mae Weems from an artsy video. I think it's powerful in terms about how we think about the evolution of art today. And after that video is done playing, I can take any questions if anyone has them. So I'm going to go ahead and get that pulled up.
there's a part of me that wishes that I were 20 years old now. You know, that I know that I'm just missing a great shift and a great turn in the possible. There's this kind of upheaval that's happening, and that's happening across the board. And I think that one of the great places to look for the ways in which we manage it are through the visual arts. It occurred to me at a certain point that I've always been interested in questions of power. What is it? Who controls what? How? Under what circumstances? Who lacks it? Who has it? I think I've really spent my life really examining ideas about power, and probably because, for the most part, I didn't think I had any. And to then figure out what it means to be empowered, and how to empower and how to impact through not only the work that I make, but the work that I care about. I think that we've sort of, come to this rather extraordinary moment. We really are up against these profound changes in what we've come to know. So there's a lot of clamor right now, and there's a kind of shift that's been going on, so that we see a kind of emergence and revival of women and African American participants in a way that we did not see them before. Or for that matter, not just African Americans, but brown people more generally are being asked to participate within the field. And that's important, because once you're at the table, something else happens, something else shifts, something else becomes more possible, something else becomes more dynamic, more meaningful, more engaging for the entire mix of people. I can see the doors swinging open, and they won't close for a really long time. This is really, really an exciting period. So for me, even within the despair, there is always incredible hope. I'm, 65 years old now. So, maybe if I'm lucky, I got like another 20, 25 years on the planet, and then that's it for me, right? I'm out. But I'm always aware of the people that widen the path for me so that I could work a little easier. Artists that did not receive the same kind of attention that I've received. And now I have to use my skin and my body to push for an even wider path, so that another group of young artists who are coming behind me can work and live and be and produce more easily than ever before. And hopefully they will do that for the next generation that's coming behind them. I think that that's what it is.
Vanessa, thank you so much for sharing with us. It's always really interesting to hear what goes on behind the scenes in terms of pulling together an exhibition. We know that a ton of thought goes into it along with research, but to see it and to hear it the way you've laid it out it's just really exciting. So thank you for sharing that. We have had one question come in so far, and that is Half Moon the only Deborah Butterfield piece that the Figge owns?
It is. We did have a piece on loan I think it was about 2 years ago. And that was a piece that was laying down, and they were kind of companions in that orientation to space for, I think it was about a year.
And that was such a lovely pairing too. I know that everybody enjoyed seeing that, especially the school groups that would come in. I don't see any other questions at this point, so please know that you are welcome to email any that you have to us. You all have my email because it's the one where you received the link for tonight's program. So please don't hesitate to do that. If you wake up in the middle of the night with a burning question that you need answered, we won't answer it in the middle of the night, but we will get back to you as soon as we can. Again, Vanessa, I just want to say thank you so much. And also thank you to you, our audience members. I know many of you have already been to the museum and explored, seen, and heard. For those of you who have yet to experience it, please make sure to check out our website before you go. Look at the virtual museum posting for it, and then also see what kind of updated information we have in regards to the museum's hours, the visitor sessions. We're highly recommending that you register in advance. We also have some current policies and procedures for visiting the museum to make sure that you stay safe, we stay safe, and everybody has an enjoyable time. So we hope to see you there, or we hope to see you here on another program. Again, next week at 6:30 on August 6th will be artist Rob Lipnick talking about his upcoming exhibition. In the meantime, we thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at future programs, and we hope you have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thank you.